Have you ever looked at a Japanese garden and wondered how everything seems to grow so effortlessly? The vegetables are vibrant, the soil looks rich and alive, and there's this sense of harmony that most American gardens just don't have. It's not magic. It's not some exotic secret only they know. It's a collection of small, intentional practices that have been passed down through generations of Japanese farmers and home gardeners. After 3 decades of growing vegetables in my own backyard, I thought I knew just about everything there was to know about getting food out of the ground. Then I started studying what Japanese gardeners were doing differently, and I realized I'd been working against nature instead of with it. Today I'm going to share 15 Japanese gardening secrets that completely transformed how I grow food, and I think they'll do the same for you. Some of these are practical techniques you can use tomorrow morning. Others are mindset shifts that change everything about how you approach your garden. And by the time we get to number 13, we're going to talk about something a little more controversial that some gardeners swear by and others think is pure folklore. Stick around to the end because I've got a bonus tip that ties all of this together in a way that might just change your relationship with your garden forever. Now, before we dig into the list, I want to share a concept that sits at the heart of Japanese gardening. It's called Shizen, pronounced Shizen, and it means naturalness or being in harmony with nature. In Western gardening, we often think of ourselves as battling nature. We fight the weeds, we fight the pests, we fight the weather. But in Japanese gardening philosophy, the goal is to work alongside nature, to observe what the land wants to do, and then gently guide it toward producing food. When you understand Shizen, everything else on this list makes more sense. You stop seeing your garden as a war zone and start seeing it as a partnership. And that simple shift in thinking is where real transformation begins. The first secret is something called Satoyama gardening, pronounced Satoyama, and it might be the most important principle you'll ever learn for growing vegetables. Satoyama refers to the border zone between mountain wilderness and flat farmland, that edge where forest meets field. Japanese farmers discovered centuries ago that these transitional spaces are incredibly productive because they benefit from multiple ecosystems working together. Now, you might be thinking, I don't have a mountain next to my garden, Bill, and that's fine because the principle still applies. The idea is to create edges and transitions in your own space rather than one big flat monoculture. This means planting taller crops on the north side of your beds so they don't shade smaller plants, letting some areas go a little wild to attract beneficial insects, and creating microclimates by using vertical structures like trellises and bamboo poles. In my Zone 7 garden, I started leaving a strip of native wildflowers along the fence line, maybe 3 feet wide, and within one season, I noticed more pollinators, more predatory insects eating my aphids, and healthier plants overall. The Satoyama approach works in zones 4 through 9 with some adjustments. In colder climates, you might use that wild edge as a windbreak. In hotter zones, it becomes a source of afternoon shade for heat-sensitive crops. The point is to stop thinking of your garden as separate from nature and start designing it as part of the larger ecosystem around you. The second secret involves a plant that most American gardeners have never even heard of, and it's one of the most powerful companion plants you can grow. It's called shiso, pronounced shiso, sometimes called perilla or Japanese basil, and Japanese gardeners have been using it for centuries to protect their vegetables from pests. Shiso has a strong aromatic scent that confuses and repels many common garden pests, including aphids, spider mites, and even some beetles. But here's where it gets interesting. When you plant shiso near your tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, it doesn't just repel pests. Some gardeners believe it actually improves the flavor of neighboring nightshade crops. I was skeptical about that last part until I tried it myself. I planted red shiso along one row of my San Marzano tomatoes and left another row without any companion plants. By August, I couldn't deny the difference. The tomatoes growing near the shiso had fewer pest problems and, I swear, a slightly more complex flavor. Shiso grows easily in zones 5 through 11. Plant it after your last frost date, spacing plants about 12 inches apart. It prefers partial shade in hot climates and full sun in cooler regions. The leaves are edible too, so you're getting pest protection and a delicious herb for salads and sushi at the same time. You'll notice the plants reaching about 2 feet tall with either green or deep purple leaves depending on the variety. When you see flower spikes forming in late summer, pinch them back to keep the plant producing those fragrant leaves longer. The third secret is one of the oldest and most effective mulching techniques in Japanese farming, and it costs almost nothing. It's called Wara mulching, using rice straw to cover the soil around your plants. Now, I know what you're thinking. Bill, I don't have access to rice straw, and that's okay because wheat straw or even clean hay works almost compost as well. The Japanese have been doing this for thousands of years, and the science behind it is solid. When you lay down a thick layer of straw mulch about 4 to 6 inches deep, several things happen at once. First, it keeps moisture in the soil so you water less frequently. Second, it suppresses weeds by blocking sunlight from reaching weed seeds. Third, and this is the part most gardeners miss, the straw slowly breaks down and feeds your soil biology. Earthworms love it. Beneficial fungi thrive underneath it, and as it decomposes, it adds organic matter that improves your soil structure year after year. I started using straw mulch about 15 years ago after reading about traditional Japanese vegetable farming, and my water bill dropped noticeably that first summer. In zones 3 through 6, apply your straw mulch after the soil has warmed in late spring because you don't want to insulate cold soil. In zones 7 through 10, you can mulch earlier and use it to keep roots cool during those brutal summer months. The key is to keep the straw a few inches away from plant stems to prevent rot. You'll notice when you pull back the mulch after a few months that the soil underneath looks dark, crumbly, and alive. That's exactly what you want to see. Japanese farmers call this building living soil, and it's the foundation of everything else we're going to talk about. Now, if you're finding these tips helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that subscribe button. I put out new videos every week sharing what I've learned over 30 years of backyard gardening, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. It helps the channel more than you know, and it means I can keep bringing you practical advice from gardening traditions all around the world. All right, let's keep going. The fourth secret is a composting method that changed everything about how I feed my garden, and it works even if you failed at composting before. It's called Bokashi, pronounced Bokashi, and it's fundamentally different from the traditional compost pile most of us grew up with. With regular composting, you're relying on aerobic bacteria to break down organic matter, which means you need to turn the pile, maintain the right moisture level, and wait months for finished compost. Bokashi uses fermentation instead. You take your kitchen scraps, including things you can't put in a regular compost pile like meat, dairy, and cooked foods, layer them in a sealed bucket with Bokashi brine, and let beneficial microbes ferment the material over about 2 weeks. The result is a pre-compost that you bury directly in your garden beds, where it breaks down incredibly fast and feeds your plants almost immediately. I've buried Bokashi in a trench and planted tomatoes right next to it 2 weeks later with fantastic results. The fermentation process also creates a liquid you can drain from the bucket, dilute with water at a ratio of about 1 to 100, and use as a mild fertilizer. You can buy Bokashi starter bran online or make your own by fermenting wheat bran with effective microorganisms. The system works in any climate because it happens in a sealed container, usually kept in a garage or kitchen corner. Start with a 5-gallon bucket with a tight lid and a spigot at the bottom. Add scraps in thin layers, sprinkle Bokashi brine on top, press out the air, and seal it up. When the bucket is full, let it ferment for 2 weeks before burying. You'll know it's working when you smell a sweet pickled odor rather than a rotten stench. Japanese gardeners have been using fermentation to improve soil for generations. And once you try Bokashi, you'll wonder why you ever struggled with the traditional compost pile. The fifth secret has to do with timing, and it's something Japanese farmers understand that most American gardeners get completely wrong. They call it Natsuyasai, pronounced Natsuyasai, which means summer vegetables, and the principle is simple but powerful. Don't plant by the calendar date, plant by the soil temperature. Here in the West, we get obsessed with our last frost date. We circle it on the calendar, we count backward for seed starting, and then we rush our transplants into the ground the moment that date passes. But Japanese farmers focus on what the soil is actually telling them. They know that a tomato planted in cold soil will just sit there, stressed and stunted, while a tomato planted 2 weeks later in warm soil will catch up and surpass it. The Natsuyasai approach means investing in a simple soil thermometer. They cost less than $10, and actually checking your soil temperature at a depth of about 4 inches before planting warm season crops. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and squash want soil temperatures of at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit before transplanting. Beans and cucumbers prefer 65 degrees or warmer. Melons and sweet potatoes do best when the soil hits 70 degrees. I ignored this advice for years because I was impatient. Then one spring I planted half my tomatoes on my usual date and held the other half back until the soil thermometer read 62 degrees, which was 11 days later. By mid-July, the later planted tomatoes were bigger, healthier, and producing more fruit. The early tomatoes never fully recovered from their cold start. Now, I don't care what the calendar says, I trust the soil. In northern zones, this might mean using black plastic mulch or row covers to warm the soil faster. In southern zones, it means being patient even when your neighbors are already planting, because warm air doesn't always mean warm soil. The sixth secret involves a crop that Japanese gardeners grow not just for food, but for what it does to the soil after harvest. I'm talking about edamame, those delicious green soybeans you get at Japanese restaurants, and they're one of the best things you can plant in your vegetable garden. Edamame, like all legumes, has a special relationship with bacteria called rhizobia that live in nodules on its roots. These bacteria pull nitrogen directly from the air and convert it into a form that plants can use. When you grow edamame and then cut the plants at soil level after harvest, leaving the roots in the ground, you're depositing free nitrogen fertilizer right where your next crop will grow. Japanese farmers have been rotating soybeans through their vegetable plots for centuries as a natural way to restore soil fertility. They'll grow edamame in a bed one year, then plant heavy feeding crops like tomatoes or squash in that same bed the following season. The nitrogen left behind by the edamame roots gives those hungry plants exactly what they need without any synthetic fertilizer. I grow the variety called Midori Giant in my Zone 7 garden, spacing plants about 4 inches apart in rows 12 inches apart. Plant seeds directly in the garden after soil temperatures reach 60 degrees, about 1 inch deep. You'll see the bushy plants reach 2 feet tall by midsummer, and the pods are ready to harvest when they're plump and bright green, usually about 80 days after planting. Pick them before they start turning yellow. If you miss that window, let them dry completely on the plant and you'll have dried soybeans for soups and homemade tofu. Either way, leave those roots in the soil. Come next spring, whatever you plant in that spot will thank you with vigorous growth. The seventh secret is all about how you space your plants, and it goes against almost everything American gardening books tell you. Japanese gardeners, especially those working with limited space, have perfected a method of intensive planting that treats the leaves of your vegetables as a living mulch. Most seed packets tell you to space tomatoes 3 feet apart, peppers 18 inches apart, lettuce 12 inches apart. These spacings assume you want to walk between every plant, and that bare soil between crops is acceptable. But Japanese gardeners working in small raised beds plant much closer together, just far enough that the mature leaves of neighboring plants will touch and form a continuous canopy over the soil. When you achieve this living canopy, remarkable things happen. The shade from overlapping leaves suppresses weeds naturally. Soil moisture stays consistent because the sun never bakes the ground directly. Soil temperatures remain cooler in summer, which keeps roots happy and extends your harvest, and you produce significantly more food per square foot than conventional spacing allows. I converted one of my 4 by 8 foot raised beds to Japanese intensive spacing 3 years ago. Where I used to grow 8 tomato plants, I now grow 12, but I choose compact determinate varieties like Japanese Trifele Black or Black Cherry instead of sprawling indeterminate types. My lettuce goes in at 6-inch spacing instead of 12. Peppers sit just 10 inches apart. The bed looks crowded at first, but by midsummer it becomes this lush, productive jungle that practically takes care of itself. The key is matching this technique to your climate. In humid zones 8 through 10, you need to ensure adequate airflow to prevent fungal diseases, so you might not push spacing quite as tight. In drier zones 4 through 7, you can be more aggressive because humidity is less of a concern. Start by reducing your usual spacing by about 25% and observe how your plants respond. You'll know you've found the sweet spot when leaves that just touch at maturity without overcrowding and fighting for light. The 8th secret is embarrassingly simple, and yet I got it wrong for the first 20 years of my gardening life. Japanese vegetable gardeners are religious about watering only in the morning, finishing before 10 a.m., and this single habit prevents more problems than any spray or treatment ever could. When you water in the evening, the foliage stays wet all night, creating the perfect environment for fungal diseases like powdery mildew, early blight, and downy mildew. When you water in the heat of midday, much of that water evaporates before it even reaches the roots, and the sudden temperature change can stress plants. But when you water in the early morning, the leaves have all day to dry in the sun. The roots receive moisture when the plant needs it. most for the day's growth, and you lose very little to evaporation. Japanese farmers call this asamizu, pronounced asamizu, which simply means morning water. It's not complicated, but it requires discipline. I finally committed to morning-only watering about a decade ago, and my fungal disease problems dropped dramatically. I used to spray my tomatoes with fungicide every 2 weeks. Now I spray maybe once a season, if at all. The practice works everywhere, but it's especially critical in humid climates from zones 7 through 10 where fungal pressure is highest. Water deeply and less frequently rather than shallowly every day. You want the top inch of soil to dry between waterings while the deeper soil stays consistently moist. In my garden, this means watering every 3 to 4 days in the heat of summer rather than a little bit every morning. And always water at the base of plants, not from overhead, to keep those leaves as dry as possible. When you see your plants perky in the afternoon heat instead of wilting, you'll know your morning watering routine is working. The 9th secret is both a technique and a philosophy, and it comes from a Japanese word that has no direct English translation. It's called Mottainai, pronounced Mottainai, and it expresses a sense of regret over waste. In the garden, Mottainai means using every single part of every plant and letting nothing go to the compost pile that could serve another purpose first. American gardeners tend to harvest the main crop and discard everything else. We pick the tomatoes and throw away the suckers. We cut the broccoli head and ignore the leaves. We pull up carrot tops by the handful and toss them without a second thought. Japanese gardeners look at all of that and see wasted food. Those tomato suckers you pinch off can be rooted in water and planted as new tomato plants, giving you a free second crop in late summer. Broccoli leaves are not only edible but delicious when sautéed with garlic. And soy sauce. Carrot tops make a beautiful pesto that rivals anything made with basil. The tough outer leaves of cabbage can be fermented into tsukemono, Japanese pickled vegetables. Even the stems of herbs like cilantro and parsley, which most cooks discard, have more intense flavor than the leaves and are prized in Japanese cooking. I started practicing Mottainai in my garden 5 years ago, and it's changed how I see every plant I grow. Last season, I estimated that I harvested about 30% more usable food from the same garden footprint simply by using parts I used to throw away. In the fall, I save seeds from my best performing plants rather than buying new ones. Spent plants get chopped and composted rather than bagged for the trash. Even my weeds get eaten if they're edible varieties like lamb's quarters or purslane, both of which are more nutritious than most things I intentionally plant. Mottainai isn't about being stingy. It's about respecting the life and energy that went into growing every leaf, stem, and root. When you garden with that mindset, waste starts to feel almost painful and abundance follows naturally. The 10th secret is a homemade fertilizer that Japanese and Korean gardeners have used for generations, and it costs almost nothing to make. It's called fermented plant juice, and once you understand the basic technique, you'll never look at weeds the same way again. The concept is simple. Young, vigorous plant growth is packed with nutrients, enzymes, and beneficial microbes. When you ferment that plant material with brown sugar, you extract all of those good things into a liquid concentrate that feeds your plants and supports healthy soil biology. It's like making a probiotic supplement for your garden. Here's how you make it. Go out in the early morning before the dew dries and collect young growing tips from nutrient accumulating plants. Comfrey leaves are ideal, but you can also use stinging nettle, lamb's quarters, mugwort, or even the growing tips of your healthiest weeds. You want about a pound of fresh material. Chop it roughly, place it in a jar, and mix it with an equal weight of brown sugar. So 1 pound of plant material gets 1 pound of brown sugar. The sugar draws moisture out of the plants through osmosis and provides food for beneficial fermentation. Cover the jar with a cloth to let it breathe, stir it once a day, and within about a week, you'll have a thick, sweet-smelling syrup. Strain out the solids and store the liquid in the refrigerator where it will keep for months. To use it, dilute 1 tablespoon of fermented plant juice in 1 gallon of water and apply as a foliar spray or soil drench every 2 weeks during the growing season. I was skeptical when I first tried this, but the results convinced me. Plants fed with fermented plant juice seem to have stronger cell walls, better pest resistance, and deeper green color. The technique works in any zone and any climate. You're essentially recycling nutrients from vigorous plants back into your garden in a form that's immediately available. Japanese gardeners often make separate batches from different plants and rotate them through the season, giving their crops a diverse diet of nutrients just like you'd want for yourself. The 11th secret is something you might feel silly doing at first, but Japanese gardeners with small spaces and precious heirloom varieties do it routinely. I'm talking about hand pollination, and it can dramatically increase your yields on fruiting crops like tomatoes, peppers, squash, and cucumbers. In a perfect world, bees and other pollinators would visit every flower on your plants at exactly the right moment, but we don't live in a perfect world. Pollinator populations have declined in many areas. Some days are too hot for bees to work effectively, other days are too cool or too windy, and if you're growing under row cover or in a greenhouse, pollinators may not have access to your plants at all. Japanese gardeners solve this problem by becoming pollinators themselves. For tomatoes and peppers, it's as simple as gently shaking the flower clusters or using an electric toothbrush to vibrate the stems and release pollen. Do this around midday when humidity is lower and pollen flows freely. For squash and cucumbers, you can use a small paintbrush to transfer pollen from male flowers to female flowers. Or simply pick a male flower, peel back the petals, and dab the pollen-covered stamen directly onto the stigma of a female flower. Female flowers are the ones with the tiny fruit forming at their base. I started hand pollinating my squash 3 seasons ago after noticing that half my female flowers were dropping off without setting fruit. The first year I hand pollinated, my butternut harvest doubled. Now it's just part of my morning garden routine during peak flowering season. Walk through with a soft brush or simply flick the tomato cages as I pass. It takes maybe 5 minutes and makes a noticeable difference, especially in urban gardens where pollinator activity is spotty. You'll know your pollination efforts are working when you see more tiny fruits forming and fewer blossoms dropping to the ground unpollinated. The 12th secret borrows from one of Japan's most famous art forms and applies it to everyday vegetable gardening. I'm talking about the pruning principles used in bonsai, those miniature trees that Japanese artists have cultivated for centuries. Now, you're not going to turn your tomato plants into museum pieces, but the underlying philosophy of intentional strategic pruning can transform how your vegetables grow and produce. Bonsai masters prune with 3 goals in mind: improving airflow through the plant, directing energy toward the most productive growth, and creating balance between the root system and the canopy above. When you apply these same principles to your vegetable garden, you get healthier plants, fewer disease problems, and often higher yields. For tomatoes, this means removing the suckers that form in the crotch between the main stem and side branches, at least on indeterminate varieties. It also means trimming away the lowest branches that touch the soil where fungal spores splash up during rain. I prune my tomato plants to 3 or 4 main stems and remove everything below the first fruit cluster. The result is better airflow, which keeps leaves dry and disease-free, and more energy directed toward fruit production rather than endless leafy growth. For peppers, I pinch the first few flower buds that appear early in the season. This feels wrong because you want peppers, not fewer peppers, but removing those early flowers forces the plant to put more energy into root and stem development. By midsummer, that well-established plant will outproduce one that was allowed to set fruit too early and exhausted itself. The bonsai approach also applies to cucumbers and squash. I train my cucumber vines up a trellis and remove the first 4 or 5 side shoots to encourage a strong main stem. Once the vine reaches the top of the trellis, I let it branch freely. This method works in zones 4 through 10 and is especially valuable in humid climates where good airflow is critical for disease prevention. The key insight from bonsai is that pruning isn't about punishment or deprivation. It's about thoughtful direction. You're having a conversation with your plant about where you want its energy to go. The 13th secret is where we venture into territory that's a bit more debated. Some gardeners absolutely swear by it, while others say it's pure superstition with no scientific basis. I'm talking about moon phase planting, and Japanese farmers have practiced it for centuries alongside their Chinese and Korean neighbors. The basic principle is this: just as the moon's gravitational pull affects ocean tides, it also affects the movement of water in soil and plants. During the waxing moon, from new moon to full moon, water is supposedly drawn upward, making this the ideal time to plant crops that produce above ground like tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, and beans. During the waning moon, from full moon to new moon, water is drawn downward into the soil, making this the time to plant root crops like carrots, beets, potatoes, and onions. Now, here's where I have to be honest with you. The scientific evidence for moon phase planting is mixed at best. Some studies have shown slight differences in germination rates and growth, while others have found no effect whatsoever. Most agricultural scientists consider it folklore rather than proven technique, but I've gardened long enough to know that traditional practices often contain wisdom that science hasn't fully explained yet. I tried moon phase planting for 2 seasons as an experiment. Did I see dramatic differences? Not really. Did my root vegetables planted during the waning moon do slightly better than usual? Maybe it was hard to tell because so many other variables affect garden success. If you want to try it, there's no harm in doing so. Consult a lunar calendar and time your planting accordingly. At worst, you'll simply be gardening with more intention and awareness of natural cycles, which is never a bad thing. At best, you might tap into something that generations of Japanese farmers understood intuitively. Just don't expect miracles, and don't let the perfect moon phase keep you from planting when your soil and weather conditions are right. The 14th secret is going to make some of you roll your eyes, and I understand completely, but I promise to share everything Japanese gardeners do, including the practices that seem a little strange to Western sensibilities. Some traditional Japanese gardeners talk to their plants. They greet them in the morning, thank them during harvest, and speak words of encouragement when a plant seems to be struggling. Now, before you click away, hear me out. There's actually some interesting science behind this, even if it doesn't work the way you might think. When you speak to plants, you exhale carbon dioxide, which plants absorb for photosynthesis. Some researchers have found that plants exposed to sound vibrations grow differently than those in silent environments, though results have been inconsistent. And the very act of talking to your plants means you're spending more time observing them closely, which helps you notice problems earlier and respond before they become serious. I started talking to my garden about 5 years ago, mostly because I read about the practice and figured it couldn't hurt. I felt ridiculous at first, muttering good morning to my tomatoes like some kind of garden variety eccentric, but something interesting happened. The more I talked to my plants, the more attention I paid to each individual one. I noticed pest damage sooner. I spotted nutrient deficiencies more quickly. I developed a relationship with my garden that made the whole experience more meaningful. Do I think my words have magical power to make plants grow? No. Do I think the focused attention that comes from engaging with plants as living beings makes me a better gardener? Absolutely. This is one of those secrets that falls firmly in the folklore category, but it costs nothing to try and might change how you relate to the living things in your care. Some Japanese gardeners also believe that plants can sense your emotional state and respond to calm, positive energy better than stress and frustration. Whether that's true or not, I know I make better gardening decisions when I'm relaxed and present rather than rushed and irritable. The 15th and final secret isn't really a technique at all. It's a way of seeing your garden that ties everything else together. The Japanese call it ikigai, pronounced ikigai, and it means your reason for being, the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning and gives your life purpose and meaning. For many Japanese gardeners, especially those who have tended the same plot of soil for decades, the garden itself becomes their ikigai. It's not just a source of food or a hobby to pass the time. It's a daily practice of nurturing life, observing nature's rhythms, and participating in something larger than yourself. When your garden becomes your ikigai, everything about the experience changes. You stop seeing weeding as a chore and start seeing it as meditation. You stop feeling frustrated by setbacks and start seeing them as lessons. You wake up genuinely excited to go outside and check on your plants because they've become part of who you are. I think this might be the most important secret of all, and it's the one that's hardest to teach. You can't force ikigai. You can only create the conditions for it to develop by showing up consistently, paying attention, and letting the garden work on you while you work on it. After 30 years of growing vegetables, I can tell you that my garden has given me far more than food. It's given me patience, humility, physical exercise, mental peace, and a daily reminder that life is always growing and changing if we're willing to participate. If you've been gardening for a while and it still feels like a chore, I'd encourage you to approach it differently. Go slower, pay closer attention, let yourself wonder at the miracle of a seed becoming a plant, becoming food for your family. That sense of wonder is the beginning of ikigai, and once you find it, your garden will truly transform. Now here's the bonus tip I promised you, and it pulls together everything we've talked about into a simple daily practice. Some Japanese gardeners maintain what's called a kamidana, pronounced kamidana, which is a small shelf or altar where they express gratitude to the spirits of nature. You don't have to share any particular religious belief to benefit from this practice. The power's in the ritual of gratitude itself. Here's what I do. Every morning before I start any garden work, I stand at the edge of my beds and take 3 slow breaths. I look at my plants, really look at them, and I say thank you out loud. Thank you for growing. Thank you for feeding my family. Thank you for teaching me patience. It takes maybe 30 seconds and it completely changes my mental state for the work ahead. When I harvest, I say thank you again. When I notice a plant struggling, I thank it for showing me what it needs. This small ritual of gratitude has made my time in the garden calmer, more observant, and more fulfilling. It connects me to the generations of Japanese farmers who understood that we are not masters of nature, but participants in something much bigger. The Mottainai principle of zero waste, the Shizen philosophy of working with nature, the Ikigai discovery of purpose, they all come together in this moment of daily gratitude. Try it for a week and see how it feels, and that's the complete list. 15 Japanese gardening secrets that have transformed my backyard and can transform yours too. From Satoyama edge ecosystems to Bokashi composting, from morning watering discipline to the humble art of talking to your tomatoes, these practices represent centuries of wisdom from gardeners who learn to work with nature rather than against it. You don't need to adopt all 15 at once. Pick one or two that resonate with you and try them this season. See how they feel. Let them become part of your routine before adding another. That's the Japanese way. Small improvements compounding over time into something remarkable. If this video helped you see your garden in a new light, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I share new gardening wisdom every week, drawing from traditions around the world and my own 3 decades of trial and error in the backyard. Drop a comment below and tell me which secret you're most excited to try. I read every single one, and your feedback helps me make better videos for this community. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Now get out there, put your hands in the soil, and may your garden grow with the quiet abundance that comes from working in harmony with nature. I'll see you in the next one.